It's easy to see the similarities between Shenmue 2's Kowloon and the walled city that once was. But when you consider all the documentaries, articles, and other such accounts out there, I think the differences between the two are also worth discussing to see what works, what doesn't, and how the high point of an already amazing game could have been improved upon. The slums were much more apparent in Kowloon Walled City than the game's version, which makes the area seem more urban in comparison. Although, the anime brings that to light, however briefly, probably to visually emphasize the poverty Wong and Joy always allude to. While it retains its lawlessness, Kowloon is depicted as being on a hill and farther away from Hong Kong than its real-life counterpart, possibly to illustrate how detached and dangerous it is compared to the rest of the society, given that's where all the criminals have their operations. It feels like a place people shouldn't bother going to, adding to the adventure and suspense of what's to come. The anime's depiction is closer to the actual walled city, likely to save time and to give Hong Kong a more accurate portrayal, since the team took the social-political angle in the first place. Kowloon is much more spacious and less labyrinthine than the claustrophobic walled city. Obviously, from a gaming standpoint, this makes it easier to move around so the player doesn't get lost or waste time, since this is meant to be the climax of the game. Not to mention, that much detail would have been too much due to the system limitations and budget. There are many more tall towers in Kowloon than the walled city, likely to accentuate the power Yellowhead members have and give credence to their potential to take over Hong Kong. This shows that their operations are not sustainable, and thus would need more space. The walled city was incredibly dark, and people couldn't get sunlight without going up to the rooftops. Because of the low resolution in late 90s and early 2000s games, the environment might have been too dark to play in without the lighting that would be used for nighttime during the day, and I guess they wanted to keep their day and night cycle intact, so Kowloon was likely brightened up for the game as a result. I'll elaborate on the Yellowheads and discuss Kowloon's fate in my Underworld deep dive in a future video. But for now, I'll say this. The game, and the anime for that matter, doesn't really convey the sense of community the walled city apparently had, despite its issues. For example, the tax system was preferable under the Triad. Other types of crimes besides organized crime were an uncommon occurrence. The proximity brought people together. People felt comfortable enough to rely on one another, contributing to relative peace, and children's play made do with what it could, among other things. The game definitely could have alluded to those other crimes at least, like Wall Market in Final Fantasy VII does, for instance, all while retaining its teen rating, particularly when you consider that substances are referenced, and even more explicitly in the anime to boot. Maybe these aspects were omitted so the Yellowheads don't appear nearly as agreeable as the Triad allegedly was, although I think it would have helped add to the nuances of the Hong Kong and, by extension, Guilin and Yao parts of the story, because the Yellowheads always seemed underdeveloped as antagonists to me. Shenmue 2 is where the complexity and different perspectives begin compared to Shenmue 1, so while the Mad Angels worked for that sort of big fish in a small pond narrative, we needed something meatier here to really drive the point home that Ryo's notions of heroism won't always solve the problem, although I acknowledge both the games and anime foreshadow it at different points. Shenmue 3 in particular reinforces it well enough. As Ryo starts to learn more about Iwao's past and encounters all sorts of people who teach him their ways of life in his travels, we see that things aren't set in stone. These events will no doubt shape how he'll come to view his relationships, most notably with his father and Lan Di, and his place in the context of his greater destiny, or perhaps even in spite of it. Regardless, the Kowloon portion of Shenmue 2, especially in the anime, demonstrates how Zhu Ying's teachings and the dynamics Ryo has with other key characters all culminate both in his growth and lingering conflict phenomenally. What are other differences between Kowloon and the Walled City you can find, and why do you think they're there? Let me know in the comments below. Let's get juicing, let's get sweaty, and let's get that Shenmue 4 Anime Season 2 combo.